I'm Patricia K. Turner. My maiden name was Nocton, Nocton, and I'm going to talk about the Nocton side of the family first of all. My dad's side of the family,
So, can you tell me who that man in that photo is there?
certainly. That is my great grandfather. His name is David John Nocton, Nocton, and he is Scottish. There's an interesting side note to his name and my name. Um, as you may or may not know, the Irish and the Scotch hated each other. And when my great grandfather's father came over, his name was McNaughton. He was part of the McNaughton clan of the Irish, of the Scottish, I'm sorry. And because there were so many Irish people in America, when people heard that his name was McNaughton, they thought he was Irish. And his quote, which has been passed down through the generations, was, "If I had a drop of Irish blood in me, I'd cut it out." So he took the Mick off and made it Nocton. It went from McNaughton to Nocton. Of course, when they came over on the boats and went through immigration, they didn't know, they couldn't write and they didn't know how to spell their name. So it was changed from Naughton to Nocton. And so all future generations are known as Nocton, not McNaughton. The man in the picture was a very interesting character. My great grandfather was he grew up in the Wild West, so he was a Pony Express rider. And the story he tells about that was that in the movies you always see the Indians chasing the Pony Express riders. And David said that the horses that the Pony Express riders rode were much better than the Indian horses because the Indian horses were not shod. So he said if they were real bored, they'd slow the horses down and let the Indians catch up to them, and then they'd take off riding and leave them in the dust. He went to fight in the Civil War. He was young and he lied about his age so he could fight in the Civil War. So he was with the Union troops in the Civil War. And there is a story about him. He fought at Lookout Mountain, and his commander wrote a letter to his mom and dad. And he said that they were fighting at Lookout Mountain and um, that David kept standing up and shooting. And he kept telling David to get down behind a rock. And David said, "I'm not going to have anybody write back to my mother and tell her that I was a coward who hid behind a rock." And so he stood up and fought all during the Civil War that way. And he did get a ribbon for his bravery. And so I think a lot of the revolutionary or the war, the soldiers that fought in the Civil War ended up going out west either as, like my grandfather, Pony Express, or drove a stagecoach, or rounded up cattle, or whatever. My grandfather, David, had said he loved horses, and so that's one of the reasons that he did what he did. David not only rode Pony Express, he also was a stagecoach driver. And his nickname was Denver Dave. And he drove the stagecoach from Denver to, I think, Cheyenne, Wyoming. Deadwood, sorry. Deadwood, South Dakota. And he was very good friends with Wild Bill Hickok and Calamity Jane. And they all hung around together, and I think they were probably a pretty tough group. But he spent a lot of years in Deadwood, South Dakota. They said that he was very tough, and I think if you grew up during that time, you weren't used to a lot of comforts. And one of my favorite stories about David was that he had dropped something on his toe, and so he had blood underneath his toenail. And the way that they treated it back then was they would drill a hole in the nail to release that pressure of the blood behind the toenail. But my grandfather said, quote unquote, hell no, they're not going to drill a hole in my toenail. And with that, he took a pliers and pulled his toenail off to relieve the pressure. But I think that, again, the people out west, they were tough, and there was no regular medicine or penicillin or anything so we're used to today. And so he was tough. And he spent his whole life going down to, it was the hall, and it was where all the soldiers from the Civil War would hang out. And he would go down there and hang out with them all the time. And it was the Grand Old Army, was that right, Gary? Weren't they the Grand Old
Grand
Army?
Army of the Republic.
Grand Old Army of the Republic, right. And I have a lot of pictures of him with all his Civil War buddies. And he always, there was a very well-known parade in Minneapolis, and he led the parade every year. He was the grand marshal of it. And he would ride his horse, and he would be at the front of the parade, and he did that for, I would bet 30 years. And I've got a lot of newspaper articles of him riding his horse and leading the parade until, he was a very old man. And even then, they would ask him at times if he wanted to ride in a wagon, and he always said no. They said he rode ramrod straight, and he was very proud, dressed to the nines, and dressed very much like a Civil War veteran would dress. David married a lady named Isabel, I believe, LaBloom. I'd have to look up her name. She was a very interesting woman. She was a Canadian Native American, and people say, and David said too, that she was mean as a hornet, and she was as interesting as he was. She ran a house of prostitution, and David was her third husband, and we have the papers on her divorces of her first two. And her husband said, I believe her first husband said, that he divorced her because he was scared of her, because she chased him around the house with a knife all the time. And I believe her second husband said he was divorcing her because she cheated on him. So I think that she and David were probably a very good match for each other. And Isabel and David had 3 children. My grandfather, William Lloyd Nocton, and there was another David that they also had.